Welcome back to part 2 of Portrait of Jackie. Here I'm using my Caran d'Ache pencil, number 89, to just continue to tweak different colors. Darkening around the nose. Now, do this if your painting needs this. If your painting doesn't need this, then don't do it. I'm constantly looking at my painting and evaluating to see what it might need. Now I want to add a little more violet color, so I'm using my 304 Orchid to add a tinge of violet-y color in the shadows. It grays down the shadow and adds color, which I'd always rather do that than just add a darker color, which doesn't always work so well. And you can see my entire work table, how I have everything laid out so that I can easily grab it. Now I've zoomed in and I decided the mouth needs a little further definition, so I'm using the Carb Othello 330 purple to darken the lip just a little bit. Sometimes as you're working, pastel dust gets on top of areas, and so you'll need to redefine it as you go along. So I'm just putting in a few darks. I'm going to restate the lights on the lip with the beautiful pink, 286 Madder Pink. So I'm just adding a few more lights there. I'm taking that out because I didn't like it, so I'm just going over it with my Carb Othello pencil and just smoothing that out. The value on the bottom of the lip and the bottom of and the skin tone right underneath the lip are about the same, so I want to make sure that shows as well. Add a little violet. I'm going to darken the corner just a little bit more with the Carb Othello 635 Beaster. Now it's time to work on Jackie's hair, and we're going to finish that up. So I'm using my 635 Cordovan to put in the dark shapes of Jackie's hair. Then we'll add the medium values, and the highlights will come last. So I'm just stroking in those dark shapes that are in her hair. I'm following the curve of her curls, but this will give me a map on how to do the hair. You have to think of hair as not strands, but groups and shapes. So we're not talking about individual strands. We're putting in the shapes, the large shapes that are in her hair. Now I'm going to add a medium value color, and for that I'm going to use the 223 Burnt Umber. You can see it is a shade or two lighter than the Cordovan, and I'm using the bottom end of it to just quickly fill in that area. So this is going to be my medium value for Jackie's hair. Now I've picked up the Cordovan again, the 353, and I'm adding in some darker strokes of hair as it falls on her shoulder. Sometimes I use the point, and sometimes I use the flat end of her hair, but I'm further defining the darks. Where are those dark shapes in her hair? I've gone back to the background for a bit here. I'm using the 548.7 Blue Violet. I'm using a flat sanded edge to kind of fill in the background. And I'm using the bottom edge, or the flat bottom, of 314 Old Lilac to add, to crosshatch in some light spaces. You can break the stick and use the side of it. And this is the 304 Orchid. I'm laying it on its side, trying to get the color to come off that way. I was waiting to finish the background around Jackie until I had the hair shape in. So this side, on the left side, I'm going to make this side blue. So I'm using a Rembrandt 505.8 that I've broken in half and sanded, and I'm putting in a medium value blue color. You can use any color you want. It doesn't have to be this one, but a medium blue color is what I decided to use. It harmonizes well with the purple, and it adds kind of a varied background, which I like. Now I'm going to need, I'm down here at the bottom, which is really hard to see, I realize. I'm putting that same color on her sweater. So I'm just kind of base coating in the sweater for right now, and we'll talk about that later. Right side of the sweater, I base coated that with 570.9, and to show the ribs in the sweater, I'm using the point of my 211 NuPastel to just highlight the ribs. So I'm giving it the look of a sweater with a minimum of attention to it. We just want people to go, oh yeah, that's a sweater, but you don't have to spend a lot of time on detail unless you want to. So I'm just adding some highlights with the white. And I'm using the bottom of the NuPastel, the 211 white, to just add some light to the right side of the sweater, which is where the light is coming from. So we're just going to indicate that with the white NuPastel. I'm also going to use that 211 white to add some white over the darker blue that's on the left side of Jackie's sweater. Now that we have the semblance of sweater on Jackie, we put in some details. We're going to deepen the background behind her hair. And for this, I'm using a Rembrandt 508.5, which is very dark. And I'm putting it right next to the hair down to her shoulder. I'm adding that deep, dark color. And I'm putting it a little bit in between where it shows through the hair. But I'm using a crosshatch motion to make it very smooth. As I move up from this dark area, I'm going to use the 548.7, the blue violet, to go over the blue and add a middle value. And then I'm adding a little more of that first medium blue that we used, the 505.8. And then for my last blue, I'm going to use 570.9 Rembrandt, which is a great light blue, and just work it around the top of her head and blend both sides of the background in that way. This is a wonderful color. I use a lot of it. I always keep it on hand because it works great for backgrounds. Now that the background's finished, it's time to finish Jackie's hair. We need to take the darks a step further. So I'm going to use 229 NuPastel Black to deepen the shadow areas and make them even darker than they were before. So I'm using the end. You can use the point. I'm starting to make hair by using that edge to kind of curl around a few hair, and when I need it to be solid, then I'll use the stick upright on its end to put in the black. Now the background's poking through a little bit, so I'm going to add some background with my blue pastel. Here I'm going to use the 263 Indian Red to add a middle value to enrich the colors that we've put down, to deepen them. So I'm stroking in a bit of that color. I'm using 353 Cordovan to add some dark brown back in. And more 229 black in the deeper shadows of the hair. And here I'm using the 353 Cordovan, put some darks in. And for some highlight areas, I'm using 253 Cocoa Brown. And I'm stroking this in more like hair because we're building up to those highlights now. And here I'm using a bit of 263 Indian Red. And 229 to make things a bit darker, creating a shadow underneath that hair. It's stray hair. I'm going to highlight that with the 253 Cocoa Brown. Here I'm adding more 229 black. So I'm just kind of going back and forth between the values, and that's what you're going to have to do until it looks like you want it to look. I'm going to get those lower curls that are just out of view down there. So I'm using black 229, Cordovan 353, Indian Red 263, and 253 Cocoa Brown. Those are the colors that I'm using to create the hair. And we'll add the highlight colors last. I've sped up this section where I finished the hair that's hanging down on her sweater. I'm adding some highlights here with a Rembrandt 37210, which we used on the face. I often use the lightest colors I use on the face in the hair. It produces a real cohesiveness between the face and the hair, the overall paint effect of the painting. Now here I'm using the 304 Orchid, which I think it just produces beautiful highlights. Now in this section I wanted to go a little bit lighter with the highlight, so I'm using the edge of my 314 Old Lilac to make those highlights just a little bit brighter. Isn't that beautiful? Just brings such life to the painting. Now at this point, I've decided there's too much color on the face, so I'm going to take a little of it off with a piece of paper towel, which is a great thing about pastel. I painted the face too dark, and once I got the hair in, I could see that I needed to remove some of that pastel. So I'm just taking that off with a paper towel. It's barely noticeable, but it was important to me to take care of that. So don't be afraid to do that if you need to do it. So I'm just blending it together and removing some of that excess pastel. After removing the color, I've decided it needs some lightening in some of the areas. So I'm going to use 339.8 to lightly blend this area and add some lights. And you can see what a big difference that makes. After removing the excess color I had on the side of her face and then adding this lighter color to blend those areas together, it just works beautifully. And I use the end of that stick to do that. Now I want to go a little bit lighter, so I'm using the 372.10. And I also used a little bit of the 436 Giraud to add a little bit of shadow color back in. Now I have the brighter 372.10, the lighter, so I'm bringing up the value and lightening the skin further. I'm adding a little more color on the neck with our 339.7 red oxide. And I'm adding a few light touches with the 376 peach. A few little highlights. I'm just fine-tuning the face. And then we'll finish up the hair. I'm using the 277 ivory to add the brightest touch to the lips and right on the edge of the chin. A little more light with the 37210. That's probably about the same value as the 277 NuPastel, but it fits in a different place. Because this has a wider end to it, it does better in the wider planes of the face. So you can see that the all-over effect we've gotten is we've lightened up Jackie's face, which is what I wanted to do. Here I'm adding a few more lights to the nose, and I'm using the 366 Shell Pink. I'm blending it with my finger. This is the 286 Matter Pink, so I'm putting a little bit brighter pink on the edge of the tip of her nose. So the color is brighter, but the value is a little darker. Adding a little bit of that on her cheek. Now I'm using my Caran d'Ache 69 Burnt Sienna. Add a little color around the eye. I'm still continuing to tweak the painting, adding a little color to the background with the 314 Old Lilac. And a little more color, I think, to the lips with the 416 NuPastel, making sure my shape is correct. And that's the 304 Orchid. And want to add a little more cool color on the side of the nose. So again, as I've told you earlier, that I go back and forth adding colors. And I really liked adding that violet. That made a huge difference on shaping the nose. And now let's finish the hair. So now I'm using the 353 to add darks into Jackie's hair. Now I'm using the bottom edge of the 263 Indian Red to just add a lot of mass and some color there. And at the very top, I'm using 253 Cocoa Brown, where it gets lighter, to apply color up there. And now I'm using the bottom edge of the 304 Orchid to go over the brown, the cocoa brown that I put in. And the orchid grays down the brown. It cools it. I like the way that looks. And we're going to intensify that look that we're getting by using the 314 Old Lilac. We're going to start adding our highlight hairs. Now this color I'm using as a highlight is 366 Shell Pink. I'm using it on the edge. Here again, this is an example of a skin tone color being used in the hair. I'm cooling down the top of the head a little further with 548.7 Blue Violet. So I'm adding this all over the crown of Jackie's head. Now I see I need a little more color, a little lightness, a little more on her cheek while I'm working, so I'm using that 372.10 to add just a little more light there. I like the way that looks. So as my eye travels around the painting, I stop what I'm doing on the hair and fix what I see that needs to be fixed on the face before going back to the hair. I'm using my 211 NuPastel to add just a tiny bit of brightness down in that one little area and at the top of her hair. Now I've switched to a 299 light gray to add these highlights with. It works better than the white. The white was a little too bright, except in that one area next to the ear that I wanted to accentuate. So I'm using the light gray 299. I don't want her to look like she's got gray hair, so I'm going to be sparing with that. But by putting it over top of the purple shines through. Using a little more 548.7 purple. Here I'm using my white charcoal pencil. You could use a white pastel pencil, and I'm adding wisps of hair. I can draw a very fine line. This adds to the realistic look of hair. It gets fly away and wispy, and so I can pull these wisps into the background, and that creates a very nice effect. So just be free with that, putting in those little hairs. I've got my white 211 NuPastel. I'm adding the white right on the edge of her nose and bringing that up even lighter than it was before. So I'm still fine-tuning little things that I see. I'm going to add some more white hairs on top. This is the bottom end of my 211 white. And this is a 277 ivory. Now I'm using the edge of the 548.7 Rembrandt to also make individual hairs. So we're working from the broad areas of groups of hairs into the individual ones as we finish up our portrait and use the lighter colors to add the brighter hair. This is the 211 white, pulling down a few hairs over her brow. I'll zoom down a bit so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to add a little more blue to the bottom of Jackie's sweater because we're finishing things up now. So I'm using a 505.8 to add a little more blue color over it. Now we can make the sweater as detailed or not as we want, but I've decided to add a little more color over there, and I'm going to add a little more color to the background. I'm putting some accents on the sweater with the 400 Parisian Blue Carbothello pencils. By just adding a few little dark spaces with the Carbothello pencil, you can create the look of a knitted sweater without a whole lot of detail. We're just suggesting it because we don't want to take away from Jackie's face. Now I do need to add some darker blue. I'm going over the sweater, and this is the 508.5 blue. Just a little bit. And putting in a few white, bright white details. It'll lend a lot of realism and make it look like a sweater. Your viewer will see that it's a sweater. Their eyes will tell them that just by looking at the beautiful details that you added. I'm finishing up this edge on the right-hand side with 548.7 Rembrandt. And I'm going to darken this corner a little bit with the blue that we used, the 505.8. I'm also going to add a little more of that to the other side. You want to darken the edges of your painting. It keeps the viewer's eye from leaving the painting and keeps them interested in what's going on. So you always want to darken those edges. Thank you for joining me for the portrait of Jackie. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you have questions, please contact me at kwit.com.